Even though Nancy Pelosi is no longer in leadership ranks of the Democratic Party, she is still a highly respected voice and informal leader of the Democrats. And one of the main reasons why she is so respected is because she had the wisdom to step aside and let a younger generation take over the leadership of the party. So naturally, everyone wants to hear what Nancy Pelosi had to say about the media created continuing saga of Joe Biden's candidacy. Ever since the CNN hosted media event that some called a debate, Joe Biden has been out on the campaign trail, assuring voters that he's up to the job. And still, the media hounds him about whether he's fit to serve. Meanwhile, Donald Trump remained out of sight in Mar-a-Lago for 10 straight days because his campaign didn't want him in front of cameras, alienating independent voters anymore. Trump can't speak or send messages without lying. And still, the media is focused on Biden. The Jeffrey Epstein files have been released, documenting Trump's time at Epstein's sex ranch and nothing. These files contain documents alleging the rape of a 13-year-old girl by Donald Trump. Crickets. The media remains locked in on Biden stepping down, even though the story here is that the convicted felon, adjudicated rapist, and insurrection instigator is still somehow a viable candidate for the Republican Party, with no one asking him to step down. And so the man who single-handedly tried to dismantle NATO froze up at a campaign rally for over 10 seconds and still crickets from the media. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is leading a NATO summit and receiving high praise from foreign heads of state. But the mainstream media is a dog with a bone and won't let go of Biden resigning. So here's footage of Nancy Pelosi, respected leader on Morning Joe. And she's accompanied by the opposition leader and democracy advocate from Belarus. And yet, here's the first question.
Speaker Pelosi, I want to start with you on President Biden first. The headlines, the polling, it all feels very dark. How do you think the president is doing in light of his poor debate performance? Can he do more? And what do you say to Democrats in Congress and even members of the Senate who are beginning to waver in their support?
Good morning. Mika, that's one version of the story. What I do want to say is that yesterday I was honored to be present at the president's speech at NATO. He was absolutely spectacular. He was received over and over again with ovations for what he had to say and the force with which he said it.
Now keep in mind, the whole reason Pelosi is there with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who, let's face it, does not have an Italian last name, like Pelosi. So don't even remotely expect me to pronounce it correctly, with all respect. But nonetheless, she's there with Nancy Pelosi because they wrote this editorial for the Washington Post with respect to this week's NATO summit. And still, even MSNBC can't get off the mainstream media circus about Biden being fit to run. And maybe it's because the New York Times was jealous that they didn't get the editorial, but they jumped on the bandwagon to keep the Biden resignation train a-running. But even when Nancy Pelosi unequivocally supports the president, MSNBC still pushes her to make a direct statement. Watch this.
He has said he has made the decision. He has said firmly this week he is going to run. Do you want him to run?
I want him to do whatever he decides to do. And that's the way it is. Whatever he decides, we go with. I think it's really important, and I would hope everyone would join in, to let him deal with this NATO conference. This is a very big deal. Over 30 heads of state are here. He is the host of it, and that means not just hosting, it means orchestrating the discussion and setting the agenda, and he's doing so magnificently. And I've said to everyone, let's just hold off. Whatever you're thinking, either tell somebody privately, but you don't have to put that out on the table until we see how we go this week. But I'm very proud of the president, and I'm very proud to be here with Svetlana.
So could Pelosi have been a little more full-throated in her support of Joe Biden's candidacy? Sure, she could have, but it is important to note two things. First, Pelosi does not want to give this discussion oxygen, and she is hinting to colleagues to back off. That is the president's decision, not theirs. That part is clear. But the other thing that is crystal clear from Pelosi's answer is that she is desperate to pivot. Hence the assertion that she's not in party leadership. And then she makes a swing to the NATO summit. Pelosi is a total pro by asserting Biden's work at NATO so that she can carefully pivot back to Svetlana, and no, I'm not going with the last name here, so that she can get the interview back on track. Yet, despite Pelosi's backing and reminder that this is the president's decision, so back off, the New York Times decided to keep the media chorus for resignation alive by running these ridiculous headlines. Pelosi hints that Biden should reconsider a re-election run. And this one. Pelosi is the most senior Democrat to suggest he considered dropping out. The latter article asserts that Representative Nancy Pelosi of California, the former Speaker and longtime Biden ally, made the strongest public push yet for the president to reconsider his re-election bid, suggesting on Wednesday that time is running short for him to make a decision. The strongest push yet? This is a classic example of the Times pushing what syndicated radio talk show host Stephanie Miller calls the mainstream media's favorite theme: Democrats in disarray. Is there an editor at the New York Times? One headline claims that Pelosi hints, and the other article claims that Pelosi made the strongest push yet. Which is it, New York Times? It's pretty shabby for the paper of record. And did Annie Carney and Chris Cameron, neither of whom, by the way, have Italian last names, well, did either of them check the news lately? Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado just went on CNN with Caitlin Collins to argue that Biden can't win, and he's going to drag the ticket down. And yet Nancy Pelosi just made the strongest push yet? And P.S., Senator Bennet, with all due respect, you need to seek medical attention and seek it quickly, because you either caught the bubonic plague or worse. Lauren Boebert is contagious. Like all legacy media these days, the Times is struggling financially and trying to figure out how to expand their audience. Focusing on the younger generation and bringing them into the fold is a mystery. It's a tough nut that no one has been able to crack. But I have news for the Times. It will be a lot easier and a lot more profitable figuring out how you can get the younger generation than your continuing attempts to move right of center. After the Access Hollywood tapes were released late in the 2016 presidential election, some Democratic pundits half joked that Donald Trump was actually a secret weapon of the Democratic Party to destroy the Republican Party. Well, now what Democratic pundits need to consider is whether the New York Times is a secret weapon for Donald Trump. But it's not exactly looking secret anymore, is it? I'm Anthony Vincent Gallo for Occupy Democrats.